Welcome along to the Fantasy Insider Podcast. My name is Hedge. Big news out of AFL House. Very exclusive stuff. The AFL released a memo hours ago saying, and I quote, "It is our determination that for the BBL final series, particularly the final, the Fantasy Insider Podcast did flow too well, made too many good points, and gave people far too much great info." And in general, they go on to express their displeasure at just how many good points we were scoring, saying that it would turn fans away ultimately, not being able to get such quality from other sources when we weren't on. And in a gesture that some media outlets have described as a big up yours, the response from the Fantasy Insider Podcast has been to drop a few extra players behind the microphone for this one today to hopefully keep that great information and entertaining banter that has become so synonymous with the podcast in recent minutes, right up to those super high levels that everyone expects. There you go. Heady stuff first up here. It's been a big news day on the show. Joining me a little later on, though, very exciting stuff, making his Fantasy Insider Podcast debut. You may have heard of him or seen his name at the top of the leaderboards everywhere. Jake123 will be on for a special news segment that we're calling the Lobster Cup. Stay tuned for that. Also making his broadcast debut, been chomping at the bit to get involved, the preeminent daily fantasy sport guru on all things draft related, a man by the name of Parks12, will also be joining me to talk draft strategy and also to plug an exciting new AFL draft that is happening on the Draftstars website. First, coming in at the top of the order to bring that cool, calm, experienced head to the start of the innings, Kiwi and Oz joins me to talk Friday night footy. Welcome, Kiwi.
Kia ora, Hedge, and g'day, listeners. It's looking like we've got another exciting weekend of women's footy in store. I'm really happy with how my lineup's looking for tonight's game.
GWS versus Carlton this evening, $5,000 up for grabs in the main game on Draftstars. How have you created your lineup tonight?
Well, for my lineups this round, I'll be focusing on players who performed well last week, but I'll also be including a couple of the guns who underperformed. Obviously, this round we've got the advantage of having seen the new team lineups in action, and now we've got some rookie stats to work with. So for the most part, we can put away last weekend's dartboard, which is nice. Overall, I'm going to continue to favour players with high possession and high tackle stats. But I do think the key to winning tonight will be predicting which of the underperforming players come good this round. The Blues are favoured to win this match by just one goal, so it should be a competitive game, which is why I've gone for a mostly balanced lineup. At forward, I like Jacinda Barclay. She's had the equal second most possessions for the Giants last round, as well as 2 goals and 6 tackles. Plus, she's bargain priced. My other forward spot is taken by Taylor Harris, who I think had a great first game for the Blues after moving from the Lions in the off-season. I was actually really impressed with her super strong contested marks last weekend and her kicking accuracy. At mid, I've gone for Courtney Gumm. She had the most disposals of any Giant in round one, and I've also rostered her teammates Em Swanson and Alicia Eva. Swanson has returned to the Giants side this week after a foot injury kept her out last weekend. She obviously didn't record any stats last week, so I'm expecting her to have low ownership, even though she did record double-digit disposals in every game she played last season. Eva's a lock for me in this game. She had the equal second most possessions for the Giants last weekend, along with an incredible 13 tackles, which is just huge. My Blues mid is Shea Audley. Even though she only had 5 disposals, she did manage 10 tackles and was right in the midst of the action, so she should give me a solid return on investment. In defence, dual position player Brianna Davey is another lock for me. She slightly underperformed last round, but she still had the most possessions of any Blue, and I'm expecting something closer to the 20 disposals and 4 tackles she had in this corresponding game last season. I'm going to have a bit of a gamble in my second defensive spot with Nicola Barr, who I'm hoping will be a bit of a point of difference play for me. Barr's numbers last game were quite ordinary, but she was the Giants' #1 draft pick last season, and she had a really good year. In fact, her worst game last season was actually twice as good as her last game effort. So I know she's capable of returning a quality fantasy point score. My ruck plays Breanne Moody, who was my tip last weekend, and she certainly proved her worth at a bargain price.
Despite the AFL's best efforts to decongest, I've taken the tacklers, and if they square what they did last week, defensively I'm getting back around 240, 250 points. So I think that I've placed a premium on them. I haven't picked a traditional forward in my team. I've taken Alicia Eva and Courtney Gumm in those forward positions. I'm taking advantage of the fact that they are dual positions. The one spanner in the works could be, as you say, the return of Swanson, who averaged 16 disposals last year in her first year. She was one of 2 marquee players. She does play on ball, so if she's in and under, that will take away from those tackle stats of the likes of Tully, who played a lot of inside mid minutes last week, and she is also in my team. She's the first midfielder that I've got picked, along with Renee Forth, who is my point of difference this week. A lot of people, I think, will miss her given the fact that she returned 40 points only. She's the other marquee player for the Giants in 2017. An ACL kept her out of the entire season. And you could just see last week watching her play, 5 kicks, 4 handballs, 4 tackles. She was in third gear. It was just dusting off the cobwebs. And I expect those stats to rise, push that 40 points up to about 60 points, especially at home in front of a home crowd. Loynes and Audley loved what they did defensively. Between them, there was almost 20 tackles, and that's the bulk of my team strategy is defence. Didn't get the footy a lot, as you said, but I think that she's good for a 50-plus off defensive stats only. Paying the money for Bree Davey in defence. I think the ball will spend plenty of time in Carlton's defence. I think the Giants are being quite underrated by the bookies, especially at home, and I think Bree Davey's prime role will be they'll be looking for her to distribute coming off half back. So expect for her to get up towards 20-plus disposals. Completely agree with Bree Moody. The thing for mine with Moody was the defence. 6 tackles for a ruckman with 16 hitouts. That's 40 points base right there before she touches the footy. So I really liked her game on the ground. So I've gone for a pretty defensive setup there, Kiwi, but I certainly like your team, especially if it's a free-flowing game. Taylor Harris and the likes of Cora Staunton and the likes of Jacinta Barclay could just tear me apart with 3 or 4 goals each. They played really well, especially the Giants' forward line was clicking beautifully. Plenty of risk involved in my strategy, but it's a bit of all or nothing, whereas yours is a lot more balanced lineup, as you say.
I think I did suffer last week from not playing any dedicated forwards. When the goals came through, my lineups were just dropping because I just focused too much on mid. So I think you've got to have some exposure to dedicated goal kickers. Stevens I really like. I initially had her in my lineup, but when I compared last week's stats to last season's, well, I think that's her ceiling. Last week she hit her ceiling, and I'm not expecting her to perform any higher. But as I said, I think the key will be picking that 1 or 2 players who underperformed last week and they come good this week. So Vesio is one that comes to mind. Would love to have her in my lineup. I can't quite squeeze her in there. I'm otherwise really happy with my lineup.
Well, thanks, Kiwi. I think you might have convinced me to put Taylor Harris into my side after all that. Great stuff, as always. I'm not sure if I like my team better than yours, so I might have to put 2 lineups in. Moving right along, though, to the remaining matches. While we can't cover them all in as much detail as we have with tonight's game, get your black books out right now. Some solid names about to be dropped in our new segment, the Lobster Cup.
Oh, God, that's tasty. I wish Pinchy were here to enjoy this.
What is the Lobster Cup, I hear you ask? Well, only the most prestigious AFLW daily fantasy contest ever created on Draftstars last night by me. There's just 2 players, both have lobsters, one can win. It's pretty simple. Who am I taking on? None other than one of the best DFS players in Australia. You may know him as Jake123. I'm going to take a wild stab and assume that his name is Jay. Welcome to the Fantasy Insider podcast, mate.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show. Let's rip right in. The point of the Lobster Cup is to take a look around the grounds to the other games that we haven't covered in depth and try to find, through picking our weekly teams, some value and or some form for our listeners. I'll go second. Take it away. Who makes your side for the Lobster Cup and why?
All right. So just before I dive in, as a little overview, I think it's worth mentioning that the salaries have changed a little bit from round 1, so not very much. So it's kind of worth keeping an eye on who did well in round 1 and trying to base your selections sort of around that, since that's going to influence ownerships a lot. In the forward line at F1, I've got Chloe Malloy from Collingwood, 13.5k. She had a nice 80 first up, and she has what looks to be a great matchup versus the Dockers. Although she does play up forward, she also gets around the ground, and she just looked awesome. She seems really skillful and looks to be someone that can be really dominant in this league for quite a long time. My F2, I've got Katie Loynes from Carlton, 11.15k. She had a solid first game score of 66, but that also included 4 frees against. So I reckon she can score a bit better than that. And it's obviously nice being able to take someone that pretty much just plays in the midfield in your forward line. Then in the mids, I've got Ebony Marinoff at M1. She's 19.15k, so she's an uber premium. She had the most tackles of any player in the league last year and didn't disappoint last week either. She had 90 fantasy points. So with Erin Phillips out again this week, I reckon she'll have another good performance. My M2, I've got Shelley Scott from Melbourne. She's 11.7k. She had a solid 78 in round 1, which included 7 tackles. She's just your sort of solid inside mid with a really good floor. Then I've got Britt Tully as M3. She plays for GWS. She's 11.1k, and she's an inside midfielder as well who played on Daisy Pearce last week. She did really well there. She had 82 fantasy points and seems to have potentially taken a step forward this year, so I like her a lot there. At M4, I've just got Alexandra Anderson from Brisbane. She is 89.50. This one sort of leaps off the page because she had a monster score last week, 101. Obviously, there aren't that many players in the AFLW that are capable of turning up, so when you can take one for only 9k, you should probably just close your eyes and click. For anyone that's looking to get a little creative, you could potentially fade her because last year her best game by far was in round 1 and she sort of faded after that, so you could maybe speculate that she'll do that again, but she's pretty young and I reckon she'll take a step this year as well, so I'm going to back her in for another good game. My defenders, I've got Jamie Stan from Brisbane. She's just 10.1k. She was awesome in round 1. She had 71 fantasy points, which included 21 possessions. She's still really young, and last year she was only playing 46 minutes a game, but she managed a bit over 55 minutes in round 1, so it's pretty likely that her scoring will continue to improve if she keeps playing those sorts of minutes. And then at D2, I just have Dana Cox from Adelaide. Just your sort of cheapie there. She's 78.50. Had a solid 56 fantasy points in the first game, plays a halfback type role, but she's pretty skillful and capable of racking up a good amount of possessions for cheap. And then in the ruck, I just went with Erin Hoare from Melbourne. She's 6,400, so the stone minimum. Pretty nice to be able to take, a solid ruck for the minimum price. She had 55 points last week, which included 22 hitouts. So yeah, I'm still pretty new to AFLW, but from what I can tell, it seems like the teams like to use multiple rucks around the ground. So paying down for some cheap rucks that still see solid usage seems like a pretty good strategy to employ while they're still much cheaper than some of the other rucks.
I've got two similar players. I'll run through my lineup. I've gone for the double midfielders in the forward line, Courtney Gum and Alicia Eva. Both of them, like yourself, I've put a premium on tackles. Both of them rack them up, and both of them aren't likely to be terribly affected by Swanson coming back into that GWS midfield. Alex Anderson, absolute must-have for mine. I watched that game. I watched her specifically. Looks to taking a step up, so she just goes straight in. Ellie Blackburn's my gun. Justine Mules, because I faded Marinoff, I had to have some Adelaide coverage. I think they're going to be tackling all day and pushing it uphill all day, to be honest, against that Melbourne side without Erin Phillips there. They just looked like they were holding back the damn wall for 60 minutes, and they had far too few contributors. There was, I think, 7 or 8 Crows that got under 25 fantasy points. So Mules, I think she got up to 9 or 10 tackles for 8,800 points. I think she goes in. She's quite cheap. And my really sneaky little pod that could fail miserably is Kate Hoare in the midfield. She was a sort of a forward pocket, forward lead, small forward for the Ds. 1 goal, 2, and I'm pretty sure she put 2 out of bounds. I think she ended up having 5 shots or something, and she just looked involved the whole game. So I like her for the price, and I was not able to fit anyone else in at that price because my defence is Mel Hickey and Bree Davey. Gone for Erin Hoare in the ruck, and because I agree, 22 hitouts, 4 tackles on debut. I like that she's cheap, and I've taken her, so that's my side.
Yeah, nice. I was definitely considering some of the other players that you took as well, so should be interesting to see how it goes.
Thanks for coming on the Fantasy Insider podcast. Jake, very good debut. Mate, make sure you let me know that you're spending my money in style, please.
Yeah, we'll see. Finally,
tonight we're here to talk drafts with the draft man. If you've never played a draft on Draftstars, you need to. End of story. They're plenty of fun and a great way to experience daily fantasy. I've played my fair share, but my next guest has played more than most. Some say more than any other human alive. You may know him as Parks12. I know him as Parks12. Very warm welcome to you, mate.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Hedge.
You're very welcome. Now, the people want to know, mate, by popular demand, they wanted to hear from the draft man. Why play drafts? Go.
Well, it's just a different version of playing Draftstars. I think it evens the competition out a little bit rather than, the guns, I suppose, that, can hedge their bets a little bit. Max entering and stuff like that. I just think in drafts it makes it a little bit more even that, you can only have the one player. Not everyone can have the same player. Yeah, it's good for your beginners right up to your experienced guys. It's got something in it for everyone. but it's just a bit of fun and takes 10 to 15 minutes for a draft. And yeah, everyone gets a bit of fun out of it, and it lasts your whole weekend. You're not outlaying heaps of money for every individual contest. You can just do a couple of drafts, and your $10 might turn it into $100, and it's a good bit of fun for the weekend.
That's all from us. Don't forget to visit Fantasy Insider at www.fantasyinsider.com.au. It's Australia's #1 fantasy tools website, so go and check it out. You won't be sorry. Good luck at the footy tonight and right throughout the weekend.